When I talk about the different units in Total War Warhammer, I talk about their Warhammer stats, and that may not be very useful for people who don't understand how the game works and have no experience with the game. So I thought I'd talk a bit about the different stats. Here, Warhammer being a tabletop game, where most results are determined by stats of units checked up against dice rolls. So the battle happens on a tabletop that has a certain length and a certain width. And the first value that we're going to be looking at, the movement value, is the amount of, in the movement phase, the amount of inches a unit can cover in the movement phase, which in turn determines how far a unit can charge. So a movement value of 4 means the unit can move 4 inches or 10 centimeters. The weapon skill is both a defensive value and an offensive value. It determines how easy it is to hit for a unit in combat and how easily the enemy can hit the unit back. The ballistic skill determines a unit's chance to hit with any missile weapon, and that has some modifiers that we'll talk about later. The strength value is the value that is tested against the unit's toughness to see how easy a wound is applied on a successful hit in close combat. Wounds is the amount of wounds a unit can take before being removed from the battlefield. Initiative is how quickly a unit is able to strike in combat, so higher initiative is good, lower initiative not so good. Attacks, the amount of attacks a unit can make, and leadership, sort of the training and the will to stay in the fight that a unit has, so how likely it is to rout due to psychological effects on the battlefield. And there are other instances where these values come into play, where you have to take tests, for example, against magic, against certain types of effects. So, the way it works, if we look at weapon skill, for example, this is a chart that I'll put the link in the description. There's sort of a cheat sheet you can use as a reference when you're playing Warhammer. And this shows you the dice rolls needed to hit with various weapon skills of the attacker against the weapon skill of the defender. Now you can see that you will never hit on lower than a 3+ before any modifiers have been applied. You will never hit on less than 5+. So even if you have a weapon skill 1 unit fighting against a weapon skill 10 unit, you will be hitting that unit on a dice roll of 5+. If you have equal weapon skill to your opponent, then you're going to be hitting on 4+, which means you will be hitting in 50% of the cases. So at some point, low weapon skill units can become useful in attacking higher weapon skill units, because they will essentially be hitting in two-thirds of the dice rolls anyway. Next up, we have Toughness. Now, upon a successful hit, a unit has a chance to wound that enemy. So, if you have Toughness, weapon damage or strength ranged weapon that has a strength of 1, it's going to wound in 50% of the cases against Toughness 1. But once you move up to Toughness 3, you're only going to be wounding on a 6+, and the same goes all the way up to 10. But with a high volume of attacks, that can happen. Now, if you have a strength of 10, you're going to be, like a cannonball, for example, you're going to be wounding everything up to Toughness 9 on 2+. Toughness 9 is wounded on 3+. Toughness 10 is wounded on 4+. So for each hit you inflict, if your strength is equal to the toughness of the opponent you're fighting, that means you will be wounding on a 4+ or in 50% of the cases. So let's say a man model here with a standard Empire swordsman is going to try to wound the Celestial Hurricanum in close combat. He can do that, but only on a roll of 6+. But if you get enough attacks in, that is going to happen. So these standard man-sized strength values, they're going to have a hard time wounding monstrous cavalry, war machines, and other big nasties, dragons, ogres, giants, trolls, that kind of stuff. Whereas units with a strength value of 5, 6, they're going to have a very easy time wounding these Toughness 3 and Toughness 4 units. Now, if a wound has been inflicted, then you have a chance to remove that wound by making a successful armor save. And the way it works is that anything from strength 4 and up removes 1 point from your armor. So that means that, let's say that I have an armor save of 6+. That would be the equivalent of a unit with just a shield, basically. I can save that unit by rolling a 6+ against strength 3 attacks. But against strength 4 attacks, I won't get an armor save because it modifies my armor by -1. Now, if we are more heavily armored here, let's say we have a shield, we are mounted, so now we have a 5+ armor. Let's say we have full plate armor -3, so now we're down to 2+. Let's say there's some barding on the mount. Now we have a 1+ armor save. Now a roll of a 1 always fails, so that means that you can't kill 1+ armor save units. However, if we are up against strength 4, that's going to give us a 2+ armor save. If we have a strength 4 with armor piercing, like crossbows and guns, then we're going to be looking at -2. So now we have a 3+ armor save, which means that a roll of 3 or more is going to save that unit. However, against strength 10, that's essentially going to negate any kind of normal armor that you have. However, in addition to armor, you have a ward save. So you can, let's say that you can't roll for your armor save because the armor was completely negated. Then you can roll for a ward save, and the ward save is a magical save that might be 4+, 5+, 6+, in some cases even better. So you can negate damage that you normally would be smashed by. And then there's regeneration, and regeneration usually happens on 4+, unless it's against flaming attacks that negate regeneration. So say you're fighting a troll and you manage to wound the troll 3 times, that troll has a 50% chance to negate the wounds by rolling 4 or more in combat. Then we have the Ballistic Skill that I talked about, and the Ballistic Skill sort of has a flat curve to it, where Ballistic Skill 1 needs a 6 to hit, 2, 5, 3, 4, and so on. Now there are modifiers to this. So, to hit modifiers, moving and shooting gives you -1 to hit. Firing at long range gives you -1 to hit. Standing and shooting against charging enemies, -1 to hit. If you're shooting at the target that has the skirmisher special rule, so loose formation, -1. If the target is behind hard and soft cover, -2. So you can see that you can end up with requiring a 7, 8, 9, or 10 to hit. If you require a 7 to hit, that means you must first roll a 6 and then a 4+. At 8, first roll a 6, then a 5+. 9, roll a 6 followed by a 6, so the chance just goes down. And if the value is 10+, then you're not going to be able to hit that unit at all. After the combat is done, you're going to calculate the combat results. And combat results are added. So if a unit inflicts, let's say, 10 wounds on the enemy unit, that gives the unit 10 combat resolution. However, there are many modifiers here. Charging high ground. If you have extra ranks, so if you have a line of goblins, for example, you have 5 ranks of goblins, that's going to add 3 to your combat resolution. The standard or the battle standard is going to add 1. So the goblins, just by being, let's say the goblins are on high ground, they have a standard, they have a battle standard, they're charging, they have the extra ranks, they're going to get to add +6 to their combat resolution without even causing a single casualty. And that becomes very useful when you have big units, because even though they will be losing the combat, they can hold for a significant amount of time because of their added bonuses. If you flank, then you get +1. If you rear attack, then you get +2. And flanking attacks and rear attacks will, if the unit strength of the attacking unit is high enough, it will remove any of the rank bonuses from a unit. So flanking is very useful. And then you have Overkill. If a champion accepts, let's say you have a dangerous orc war boss, and he fights against an Empire Swordman champion, and he just slaughters the guy. He kills the champion, but then he inflicts 5 wounds. So he beats the champion into the ground. Then that's going to turn into overkill, which means that the unit has to test to see if it wants to stay in the battle, because they saw their champion get beaten into the ground. So that's going to get added to the combat resolution of the entire combat. Now, then the loser takes a break test in the combat. For demons and undead, it's slightly different, but let's say it's a standard goblin unit. So the modified leadership value is the starting leadership value plus any positive modifiers. Then let's say the goblins inflicted 5 wounds, they have 3 ranks, they have a standard. So they now have a combat resolution of, let's see, 5 plus 4, they have a combat resolution of 9. But the goblins took 10 casualties. And the opposing unit also had 3 ranks, it also had a standard. So 14, they are going to be losing that combat by 5. If they lose the combat by 5, they now have to check towards their leadership, roll 2 dice, and let's see here. The leadership of 6 means that these goblins are very likely to just rout off the field when things start going poorly. Now you can, of course, support the leadership value by having a unit that has a leadership bubble around him, that makes it the general, for example. But there are also other instances where leadership comes into play, for example, against units that cause fear, against units that cause terror. If friendly units start breaking around the units, then they're going to have to test against their leadership. So, in Warhammer, these stats usually go from 1 to 10, and then they're checked. Some stats are not checked up against stats most of the time, like the movement value. It's just a basic movement value that determines fleeing distance, charging distance, movement distance. But all of these other stats are checked up against the stats of another enemy model. So a standard, the reason why I put up the goblins here is because they sort of represent the low tier of melee units, and a standard ballistic skill of 3. So that means that when you see units that run around with weapon skill 5, 6, 7, 8, when you see units with strength 5, toughness 5, even though that's a fairly low number on a scale of 1 to 10, or mid-range number, they're still going to be able to slaughter a lot of low-tier troops, and it's going to be difficult for low-tier troops to overcome them. However, engaging these low-tier troops in the front means that these low-tier troops might just win you to combat resolution. Let's say you have a hero crashing into a regiment of goblins, and the goblin champion challenges him, he gets slaughtered, 5 wounds overkill. That unit still only has 5 combat value. So yes, there are extremely overpowered units in Warhammer, extremely powerful melee units, but there's still room on the battlefield for big solid chunks of infantry that are able to soak up the damage and keep fighting, simply due to having a lot of men and having a lot of faith in their ability to keep on fighting, because they have this huge regiment with a battle standard and everything like that. So hopefully, when I talk more about the units and their stats in Warhammer, this short video has made it easier to understand what I'm talking about when I say something like, this war machine has toughness of 5, which isn't the best, but it will still allow it to take some damage, but a cannonball with strength of 10 is going to wreck it fairly easily, stuff like that. So, that's it for the short introduction to Warhammer. Any other questions, feel free to ask. I'll provide the link in the description to the cheat sheet if you would like to take a look at it yourself. Strength and honor.